And welcome back to Janky AF. Now here we have a beautiful 2010 Scion XB. Now the word Scion means an heir or descendant to a wealthy, aristocratic, or influential family. Obviously Toyota is a giant and very prestigious in the automotive world. So does this little bubby here measure up as the heir to the throne? Well, let's find out.
Hey.
First, let's talk a little bit about Scion. And Janky do thanky to Olath or Olathe Toyota in Kansas for their blog post from which I gathered much of this information. Scion was founded in 2003 and was aimed at Gen Xers and Millennials who, according to Toyota, wanted affordable, fuel-efficient cars that were different from what their parents drove. That meant that the traditional Toyota mainstays such as the Camry and Corolla weren't going to cut it. Sales peaked in 2006 with 173,034 vehicles moved, but combined with a global recession and an aging product lineup, this figure petered off to just 56,000 sales in 2015, and that was with 7 models being offered, as compared to only 3 models in 2006. The next year, Toyota officially squashed the company, a late casualty in the bloodbath of brand deaths, including GM's bailout-inspired killing off of Hummer, Pontiac, Oldsmobile, Saab, and of course, Saturn, the brand I think Scion most resembles. Scion fared decently with Gen Xers, but never took off with millennials. Bob Carter, Toyota Motor Corporation's senior VP of U.S. operations, summed it up succinctly when he said, "For those buyers, frankly speaking, Toyota as a brand is more aspirational than Scion was." Indeed, the peak of 173,000 vehicles sold under the entire brand in 2006 paled in comparison to the Corolla's individual model sales figure of 363,000 units sold in the year 2015 alone. After Scion was unceremoniously whacked after its brief run, CEO of Toyota North America Jim Lentz put this beautiful marketing twist on the failure by proudly proclaiming, "This isn't a step backward for Scion, it's a leap forward for Toyota." He went on to add that, "I was there when we established Scion, and our goal was to make Toyota and our dealers stronger by learning how to better attract and engage young customers. I'm very proud because that's exactly what we have accomplished." It must be said, however, that this has some truth to it, evidenced by the fact that half of the 1 million Scions sold throughout the brand's history were to drivers younger than 35, and 70% of them were new Toyota customers, meaning that if the idea was to get more young people in the door at Toyota dealerships, the plan worked. Of course, it's impossible to know how many of those customers would have purchased a Toyota anyways, and in this light, the Scion, or heir to the throne, resembles a sacrificial lamb, laid at the altar of Toyota's youth sales figures, and quickly dismissed once it had made the proverbial rain come. But I'm glad these quirky little bastards are out there, and I hope enough of them get preserved so that in 20 years one will show up to a car show and make everyone say, "Oh yeah, Scion, you remember those?" And welcome back to another episode of Every Car is a Great Car. Today we have a really great car, and a very special one for me because I've spent a lot of time in this car. This is a 2010 Scion XB. Now I remember when Scion came out, and to be honest with you, it seemed like kind of a gimmick. But I think the closest thing you could draw to it, and the comparison I want to make here, is to the company called Saturn, which is a company I happen to love. I love Saturn cars, and it was a different kind of car company, or new kind of car company. And you know, that's kind of what Toyota was trying to do when they came up with Scion. Now this is a 2010 XB, belongs to my great friend, Mr. Nicholas, and he bought this car when he had just graduated college. He was entering quote-unquote the real world. And he needed something reliable, and the 2 previous cars that he had owned were a 2000 Ford Taurus, which the engine blew up on, and then his family had a wonderful Chrysler PT Cruiser that the engine blew up on, and then, remarkably, they paid to get a new engine installed, but that was being otherwise used in the family, and it was time for him to buy a car and start his life, you know, and so the first thing he said was he wanted something reliable, so he's going to get something Japanese. Great decision, you know. No shade against General Motors, but, you know, he was looking for something that had a mark of reliability to it. And so he walked into the great Toyota dealership, and they must have seen him walking in, and this brand was still pretty new because Scion began in 2003, so, you know, still in the middle of its run. And they said, Nicholas, we're going to put you in Scion. So as he described to me, the thing he liked about it was they sat him down, you pick the car out on a computer, you design the car on a computer, you add the things you want to it. And in that regard, it was, you know, I guess you call it state of the art. But obviously this car was marketed towards young people. We've talked about Scion. We gave you a little introduction to the company. And being the heir to the throne, as it were, this is what they were presenting. And, you know, this is where it gets into the idea of having gimmicks, because, you know, when you bought the car, the way Scion structured the company was that they were trying to sell these cars at a fixed rate. You know, the price was fixed. There was no haggling, no negotiating. You buy it like you would buy it as a commodity. And in that way, I have to say, they were kind of ahead of their time, because now with all these companies coming out, TrueCar and Carvana, you know, young people don't want to haggle. They want to buy the car as any other commodity that they would buy. And indeed, cars are kind of becoming appliances, you know, and you can have the whole debate with electric cars and the Apple car and all this and that. But to not get too far ahead of ourselves, so he was kind of the ideal candidate to buy this car. He's exactly who Toyota wanted to buy this car. And he did. And it's now has, you know, let's check the odometer here. We got 147,500 miles on this car. And in his words, it's been extremely reliable. So it's been a good car. It's a hatchback. It's got a lot of room. It's very boxy, so you can fit kind of taller stuff in it. Now, I personally have been on bachelor trips in this car. We drove up to Maine, where Nicholas proposed to his now wife up there. So it's got a lot of memories in it, and it always got him there, you know. Now, it was, to quote a phrase, rode hard and put away wet. You can see that in some of the interior. It hasn't exactly, you know, it's showing its wear. And now the car is at a state where, you know, it's got 150,000 on it. It's got some brake issues. It's got some wheel bearing issues. It's got an exhaust leak. I don't know if you can hear that, but let's punch it real quick, shall we? So, you know, it's showing its age. The brakes are starting to pulse a little bit as we get stuck behind a bus here. But the car has been a very faithful companion to him for a decade now, a little over a decade, in fact. And in that regard, he got exactly what he wanted. He got, you know, the Toyota reliability. We always used to send him little memes and little pictures of XBs that we would see all, you know, decked out in these custom wraps and all this sort of gaudy, gimmicky things. And you would see a lot of companies like Red Bull would have, well, they had their minis, but they would have Scions, or, you know, newfangled companies in New York City that were sort of going after the youthful vibe. They would have Scions with big custom wheels on them, all wrapped with the whole kit and everything. And that's what it was. So in that way, it was a lot like Saturn, except maybe even more, you know, a generation removed. What people were looking for from Saturn, that generation was a little different than this generation that came up with Scion. But they're very comparable companies. Now, Saturn was actually incorporated in 1990 and ran all the way, 1985, and they ran all the way till 2010. So they had a 25-year run, but they didn't actually start producing cars until 1990. So you can call it a 20-year run. Scion ran from 2003 until 2016. So only a 13-year run, a baker's dozen. And in that time, they only produced 8 models. Saturn, I didn't look it up, but I think a lot more than that probably, in different generations of models. So by that standard, Scion was kind of a failure, and you'll know in the end, you know, they had the FRS, or the BRZ was the Subaru, and it just got, they just slapped the Toyota badge on it, you know, which is the badge that's on all the parts and all the part numbers anyways, and it's the badge that's on the engine. So I always wonder with these things, because it seems like such an exercise in futility. Was it worth all the expenses, the legal expenses and the lawyers and incorporating companies and stamping, paying graphic designers to come up with a logo, which, to be honest with you, I'm not crazy about the Scion logo. Although I will say I absolutely love the front end grille on this thing. It's a really cool piece. But it's sort of funny to sit here in this little thing and ruminate. Now the XB, I think you could maybe argue that TC was the most successful. I haven't actually looked at the sales numbers, but the most successful car that they made. That was a little coupe, and a lot of my buddy Shawnee had a TC, and they seemed like they were kind of a sporty little thing to run around in, if you didn't want to buy a Honda Civic. It was something different. But I think the XB was one of the most memorable cars because they were so boxy, particularly the first generation XB that was like a perfect little box. And they were cool because you could get them with a manual transmission, but that only ran for 3 years, and they immediately started re-engineering it and coming out with this, which is, a bit surprising. And as Wikipedia says, when they came out with this thing and re-engineered it, the sales plummeted. And I just think it wasn't quite as, distinguishable as a car. It was kind of goofy looking. But obviously they sold a few. You can only go so wrong with a Toyota. Now this has a 4-speed automatic transmission in it. And what I love about this shift lever is it's right up high and in the center. If I have my hand on the armrest here, which is it's a little skinny, but not bad. My hand is right on the shifter, and it has a great little Scion logo near the triangle sign, your blinkers, your emergency lights, which is pretty funny because the first thing, if you get in an accident or your car breaks down or you get a flat tire and you go to hit that button, the first thing you're going to be reminded of is what you're driving, which is a Scion. So I thought that was a pretty funny touch right here. But what I love about this shift lever is it really reminds me of, some of these cars, the Toyota Matrix and Pontiac Vibe had it up there. And famously, the Alfa Romeo Spider had the shift lever up here, the graduate car, so it's kind of a cool little thing. And that leads into a conversation about the interior generally. And I actually really, really like this interior. And the thing I like most about it is just the ergonomics. You have this amazing little pocket right here. This pocket right here is so perfect, especially for cell phones. So in that way, they were totally going for what their demographic wanted. It's a perfect little pocket. It's got a center gauge cluster. Center gauge clusters were all the rage in this time period. And indeed, those were kind of adapted full scale because most electric cars have their big screens now. But it's not too far in the center, and it's got a really good visibility range. You can see, your digital gauges right here. It's very clearly laid out. It's very minimalistic in a way, but I just can't describe it. This long, sweeping, horizontal oval shape here with another oval on top for your gauges, and then this little pocket right here. It really is laid out extremely well, and I have to get in the high shift lever that's very easy to reach. You can be in this car and just, not have to move anywhere, strain anywhere. The visibility is good. You have a very low roof and a pretty small outlet, but we should do our window test here. I'll roll the windows down for a second. Now, this is becoming a trend. You can put your arm on this door. It's not bad. It's a little high, but you can rest your arm on the door on a sunny day. That's always a test I look for. So the second generation XB, as we've noted, sales didn't do as well and just wasn't quite as noteworthy. Also offered with a manual. This one has the automatic. But it's a great little car. It really is. I just think, for me, the funny thing about this car was Scion. And it almost became a joke. So in that way, it kind of backfired in terms of the cultural currency or cultural value of Scions. I feel like it was kind of an inside joke amongst our friend group, the Scion. And again, we made fun of everything mercilessly. So certainly it was not unique in that regard. But I don't think a lot of people ever really took Scion seriously. And I feel like people took Saturn a little bit more seriously. They had some major innovations too. They had the dent-resistant doors. They had a lot of things that I think really set them apart, whereas I think this was more or less like, barely a badge job by Toyota. And of course they had their unique body styles, but as we've seen, a lot of those body styles just got slapped with a Toyota badge in the end anyways. So I think it was kind of a failure on Toyota's standpoint from, a marketing, as a marketing exercise, but the cars themselves live on and are very reliable. Now the first generation XB had a little pea shooter between 103 and 108 horsepower, depending on who you ask. And this got bumped up to, that was a 1.5 liter. Now this is a 2.4 liter Toyota motor. I'm sure it was using everything, and it makes 158 horsepower. And if we punch it right here, it's got a little pickup to it. You know, if you really have to merge on some lane or something like that, it'll pick up and go, but it's certainly nothing to write home about. And the thing about that is, with the increased power, and there's a little Chrysler Crossfire Roadster, that's pretty slick there. You can see the brakes are starting to make some noise now. We have a crack in the windshield. It's a little worse for wear, and it's at the point now where it's like, you know, you're gonna spend upwards of $1,000 to really make it right. And at this point, I think it's probably worth it, especially with 147 for Toyota reliability, especially get you inspected, get you through another winter. But that's sort of the question Nicholas is at too. Now his wonderful wife Sarah has a Mazda CX-5, and that thing has been, oh, now look at this, we have a Scion FRS right there. Why don't we pull a little U-turn and drive by that, shall we? That's kind of a serendipitous little moment. Test our 3-point turn here in a narrow city street. It's got the great J-gate shifter like an old Jaguar, which is a nice touch, and this sort of polished aluminum plastic type situation going on here. Steering is nice and light, power assisted obviously. It's got a pretty good turning radius for being as boxy and square as it is, because it's still a pretty compact car. There you go, the Scion FRS right there. So brothers, similar color, might even be the exact same color. An all-around great car. What I was saying was, with the pickup in power, you're going to get not as great fuel economy. And obviously, this thing is not a wind tunnel champion. So I think you're looking at, you know, 22, 26, which is pretty disappointing, quite honestly, for a car of this small and, you know, a car in this economic segment. But, you know, unless you're buying a Prius, no car is really going to get much better than 30 nowadays, just the way cars are made and the standard they're built to and the weight that they carry around. We're going to pull back by this Crossfire again, which is great. There's a car I'd love to review. A very practical car. The seats fold down. As you can see, I got them folded down right now. The back hatch and all the struts on the back hatch still work great after all this time, so those things are nice. Now, when Nicholas was ordering this car, when they got him sold in the Scion, of course, it's a base price, so it's like, I'm paying this price, no more, no less. However, what Scion did, and this was kind of another one of their great gimmicks, is you go in there and then they upsell you on all this stuff that's probably high profit margin for them. You know, he didn't like the steel wheels, so they sold him on the alloy wheels, which, you know, that was probably a couple grand right there. You have a 16-inch alloy wheels, and you can see some of the center caps have fallen out now. And they upgraded them. They sold them on this Alpine, you know, big touchscreen head unit display. This car, this is one of my favorite gimmicks of like the 2000s. It came with like a bunch of mix CDs. It was like Scion's own, you know, mix CD department. And of course, all this stuff was kind of going by the wayside. This does have an auxiliary and actually USB port, which I thought was pretty good for its time. But, you know, if Scion really thought, or if Toyota really thought they were going to be sort of like an influencer before there were influencers in, you know, getting people to listen to music because they saw it on a Scion CD, I think they were probably, you know, a little misguided. Also now, it was right when everything was starting to go digital too, so the fact that they were CDs at all was kind of, you know, again, a gimmick. But, you know, give them credit for trying. Now we're starting to get some real squeak and wobble here. I can see why this car isn't the most confidence inspiring. Now this car has also lived for 10 years on the streets of Buffalo, and all things considered, it hasn't done too bad. You got a side mirror that's broken, you got a crack in the windshield. For being in upstate New York winters for 10 years, I'm also really impressed with the lack of corrosion on this vehicle. You got a little on sort of the rocker panel back there, you got a little at the top of the windshield here. And in fact, and this will lead into a great rant, when Nicholas tried to get the windshield replaced by Safelite, made an appointment, they came, they showed up, and then they said, can't do it. There's too much corrosion around your frame of your windshield, so we can't replace your windshield. Didn't recommend anybody that could, didn't try to schedule a follow-up appointment, just said, nope, sorry, bye. And, they're kind of the only game in town, which is funny, because despite that, because they have no competition, they also have no reason to sort of like necessarily perform the good service. So I don't want to go off on Safelite, but the same thing happened to me with my 1986 Aerostar. I took it to a local guy who did glass around Janky town, and he put it in no problem, and he even put a little metal rivet in my side panel because that was starting to fall out, and he couldn't find the right gasket for the year I had an Aerostar, so we had to get another one that was slightly different, but he let me know, the rubber that goes around. And it was a wonderful experience. Insurance paid for it. And so, not to get on my high horse here, but a lot of companies like these, they're really not interested, it seems like, in taking care of their customers so much as they are in the bottom line and doing business in the most economical, hypersensitive way possible. All that to say, he's got a crack in the windshield. Now, I forget in New York State, I think it's 11 inches he may be able to have. So he's got to find a guy to replace the windshield on this. And hopefully he does, because I'd like to see this thing keep going for a while. It's got 4-wheel disc brakes, alloy wheels, as I said. Now, after being upsold on the alloy wheels, and I've heard this from a lot of different people. Now, I'm a huge steel wheels advocate. You can see that on my Buick. You can see it on some of my other vehicles. A lot of times the alloy will degrade, and it can cause burrs that can start to cause slow leaks in your car, in the tires of your car. So just a little irony there, but they sold them on the wheels, they sold them on the Alpine head unit. And the funniest thing about this head unit to me is that it's like a factory aftermarket head unit, which somehow kind of falls in line with Scion's spirit. They want it to be like a hip young person's car, and a lot of young people have like custom head units in their car. So Scion, in all their authenticity, was able to put an aftermarket factory head unit in this car, and it is an Alpine, and the sound system is, it's fine in this car, it's nice. But that was another little upsell that they did. So, start off on a basic economy car, this is comparable to a Corolla or Civic or something like that. But I think out the door he paid around $18,000 for this car, 10 years ago. So that was a decent chunk of change for a brand new car. I think you could still get Subaru Imprezas for like $19,000, bare bones. I think that was just another Scion we passed. Oh, that might have been a Toyota IM after they rebranded. So, it was an investment. And in fact, living in Buffalo, which at the time was very, very cheap to live in, his car payment was, I think, $293 a month, which was actually higher than his rent, which is very hilarious. But that does speak to probably, again, Scion's client base that they were going for. I don't know that they would brag that the car payments were higher than their rents, but certainly they were targeting people who were in this demographic. So he got a job at AmeriCorps, and they said, well, we can't pay you a lot, but we want to try and see if we can subsidize you. So, like, can we pay your rent? And he said, well, actually, if you could pay my car payment, that'd be great because it's more. But I think they eventually just thought that might be a bad look and paid for his rent. So Scion was not subsidized by AmeriCorps. Now we're getting some rumbling and some rattling going on in the road field. But, like every car we review, the bottom line is this is a great car. He paid it off at 100,000 miles, and it's gotten 50,000 miles since then. He's other than the brake issues and one wheel bearing that he had to do, it's been dead reliable, and it's been a really great car for him. He's had it through winters, he's had it in summers, road trips, music festivals, golf outings, you name it. It's just been a Johnny-on-the-spot car that's always ready to pack 4 people and their stuff in it and, drive across the country if need be. So I'm very fortunate and very appreciative to Mr. Nicholas for letting us drive this wonderful 2010 Scion XB. And if you are a Scion, I'm sure there's Scion enthusiasts out there, and I certainly don't mean to besmirch you by calling this car a gimmick. But I thought it was a very cool comparison between this and Saturn, who I love. And after driving this today, I have a little bit more warm and fuzzy feelings towards Scion, because at the end of the day, it was Toyota taking a risk and doing something different, and I'm trying to carve out a little off-brand niche for themselves. And nothing ventured, nothing gained. So I do appreciate that they did that. And they had a good run, and who knows, maybe even some of these will turn into collectibles someday. I think that if there's any collectible Scion, it'll be the little tiny smart car thing that they did, or maybe the FRSs, because they were only Scions for a couple of years, and some people might even prefer a Scion to a Toyota because it has that little novelty towards it. But I think the collector car Scion will be first generation Scion XB with a manual transmission in it, because you're going to get great fuel economy and manual transmission, obviously, and those cars were so distinctive looking. This was also the era of the Nissan Cube and everything like that, and there's one right there. That's hilarious. So hopefully Scion gets a couple classics out there, and it's all Toyota parts, so they're super easy to find parts for and maintain. And if anyone has one of those first gen XBs, I would love to review it. I guess I just read this that they only made them from 2004 to 2006, so probably becoming somewhat of a rare bird. So there you go. We're gonna take a little loop here and see if we can drive by that Nissan Cube. Even at 150,000 miles, the AC still blows very cold. It's a very comfortable car. Your seating position is not super low, and I think that's what a lot of people gravitated towards too, is that you feel like you're a little up high. It doesn't feel too tin canny, and certainly you have a very nice view out the front and great visibility all around, really. So for young people that were getting into their first new car, I think Scion was probably a great option. It's certainly a sign of the times. I doubt Toyota will be doing anything like that anytime soon. But the 2000s were an interesting time period now that we have some time to look back at them. And one more brake test here. So I know I've rambled on quite a bit now, and if you've stuck with us this long, Janky do Thanky. This is Janky AF. We're a young growing channel, and obviously we'd love your support, commenting, liking, disliking, and certainly subscribing. Helps us out so much. We really appreciate it. Won't beat you over the head with it, but that being said, we're going to pull into a 7-Eleven, get a nice cold drink in our Scion, and until next time, Janky do Thanky.